This is Matt, and these are the vintage vinyl albums for July 2020. The debut album from British metal band Jaguar was an influence on both the speed and thrash metal genres, and yet relatively unfamiliar to American metal audiences of the 1980s. Given that, did the ensuing decades look favorably on this band, and this album in particular? The answer to that might not be so clear-cut. Jaguar was part of the new wave of British heavy metal era of the late 70s and the early 80s. They might not have been as revered as bands such as Raven or Venom, but their moderate success definitely guarantees them a significant mention in this period of metal's evolution. Although Jaguar recorded a couple demos in the early 80s, it would be the release of their 1981 single for Backstreet Woman that would get them the attention of Neat Records. While Jaguar was playing a rock festival with Raven in early 1982, they were approached by Raven's manager and owner of Neat Records, Dave Wood, to record and release their next single, Axe Crazy, later in 1982. A fun fact about the recording of Axe Crazy is that Conrad Lant, better known as Kronos from Venom, was the tape op, or engineer's assistant, during the session. According to Jaguar guitarist Gary Peppard, Wood pulled him off tape op duties following the single because he didn't want it getting out that the lead singer of Venom was, additionally, an engineer's gopher. As for the recording of the Power Games album, the band wasn't exactly happy with the process or the final product. Jaguar was given only 5 days to record the album. They also weren't happy with the mix, as they'd had previous issues with the same recording studio while tracking one of their singles. On top of that, there was also the matter of that atrocious album cover art. The concept pencil drawing was done by bassist Jeff Cox, but the final art was interpreted by a graphic artist from the label. Strangely, the band wasn't allowed to see the cover during its creation for some unknown reason. In fact, one member first saw the art when the record was already out and displayed in a store window. That's pretty much a Spinal Tap story right there. Top songs on this record are Prisoner, The Fox, and Dutch Connection. A couple of vinyl reissues for Power Games came out in 2017. The one for the US market was put out by Real Gone Music in both black and white splatter vinyl, 350 copies, as well as brown and green camo swirl, 700 copies. As for the UK, an edition was released by Back on Black on red vinyl and with a gatefold cover. Unfortunately, Jaguar broke up in 1984 due to an unfulfilled contract deal with their follow-up label Roadrunner. But they did reform in 1999 and released 2 full-length studio albums, Run Ragged in 2003 and Metal X in 2014. Already being a big fan of the Nawabum era of metal, I was basically receptive to most of the bands that came out during that time. As for this album, I definitely dug it. Fast, heavy riffs, good vocals, and some catchy tracks round out a respectable debut effort. I would recommend both this album, as well as those 2 singles I discussed earlier. Classic stuff. To say that Atrophy's first album blatantly shows their influences is a bit of an understatement. Coupling that with an increasingly overcrowded second wave of thrash metal scene, and it might be surprising that they got as far as they actually did. Atrophy initially came out of Arizona, similar to both Sacred Reich and Flotsam and Jetsam. But this might be where the comparisons stop. The band originally formed in 1986 under the name Heresy. After the name change and a couple of demos, Atrophy were picked up by Roadrunner Records, through which they released their debut effort. The record was even produced, engineered, and mixed by known metal producer Bill Metoyer, who was also responsible for Slayer's early albums, among those of many other bands. So Atrophy had this great label behind them, and they had this legendary metal producer handling their record, so you would think that this would be this amazing album. At least you would think so. Regarding the influences, they're certainly there. A bit of Exodus in the riffs, some Celtic Frost in the vocal delivery, and some standard thrash drumming that does more to keep time than to prove interesting or innovative. In fact, the borrowing is coming from a lot of bands. Songs to check out include the title track, as well as Product of the Past. On the positive side, the musicianship here is fairly good from a technical standpoint, notably during the tag team soloing of the two guitarists. And even the lyrics, while coming from a certain political position, are thought-provoking at times. So, there's some undeniable merit to this recording, just nothing groundbreaking. Currently, there are no known vinyl reissues for this album. Your best bet is either to track down an original copy, or, if you don't mind CDs, there was a 2007 reissue from Displeased Records that was fully remastered and licensed from Roadrunner. Socialized Hate was a serviceable but paint-by-numbers thrash album that came out during a time when the market was already glutted with much better bands. If you're not expecting uniqueness or eclecticism in your metal, this album might suffice. Otherwise, buyer beware. The second album from guitar legend Yngwie J. Malmsteen is truly heavier and more aggressive than his debut effort. But does Marching Out build upon the foundation of an already impressive debut? As far as I'm concerned, yes it does. Right away, there's at least one reason why this album ranks at least a little higher than its predecessor, and that reason is less instrumentals. When only 2 of the 8 songs of the first album have actual vocals, it's nice to get an Yngwie album on which 8 of its 10 songs are with a singer. And speaking of whom, this means you get to hear a whole lot more of Jeff Scott Soto, whose vocals are just as fantastic on this record, and more frequent. Soto's improved a bit since the last record as well, and the power and delivery are certainly there, overall complementing the music well. And as for the music, Yngwie tones down the noodling a bit here, allowing the songs to breathe a bit more. Tracks are catchier as a result, and don't suffer from becoming one giant guitar solo. Can't deny Yngwie's a great talent, but sometimes too much of something can be too much. Notable tracks include Disciples of Hell, Soldier Without Faith, and most of all, the single for this album, I Am a Viking. And totally having nothing to do with the music, the US version of this album has a somewhat obvious typo in the track listing for Disciples of Hell, namely the missing S in the first word, making it Disciples of Hell, though the spelling error doesn't show up on editions outside of the US. In promotion for this album, a music video was made for the track I'll See the Light Tonight. The song is certainly one of the most commercial on the album, but still somehow manages to retain Yngwie's signature songwriting. Even mainstream Yngwie is still Yngwie. Of course, the album also charted well on the Billboard 200, peaking at number 52 and remaining on the chart for 28 weeks. To the shock of many, this album has never seen a reissue on vinyl since the 1980s, and only for the Japanese market in 1987 via Polydor. Plenty of CD reissues though, if you're into that sort of thing. Marching Out is both a heavier and far more balanced album than the one before it, toning down the endless guitar soloing and letting the songs be songs. Add to that the stellar performances of the other band members, and Marching Out becomes a highly recommended album. Exciter's first album is a brutal speed metal assault that brings a lot of thrash into the mix as well, but doesn't measure up to the landmark thrash releases later that year, or perhaps even exceed them. Maybe. Formed in Ottawa, Canada by vocalist and drummer Dan Beeler, guitarist John Ricci, and bassist Alan Johnson, the band started out as Hellraiser, but then changed their name to Exciter in 1980, likely attributing the Judas Priest song of the same name. After recording their World War III demo, they shopped it to Shrapnel Records, who in turn put the track on Volume 2 of their US metal compilation in 1982. Yes, a Canadian band on a comp named US Metal. Anywho, that same year, Exciter officially signed to the label and released their debut album. Some of the fussier listeners out there might take issue with the production on this record, but I don't see it as a problem. If anything, it adds to the overall sound of Heavy Metal Maniac, even to the point of making it more metal. Quite frankly, I wouldn't want this record any other way. Many standout tracks on this amazing album, including Iron Dogs, Under Attack, and Stand Up and Fight. With hindsight being 2020, the real shame about this record is in its timing. Although it came out many months before Kill 'Em All and Show No Mercy, Shrapnel Records didn't have the resources to put the band on the road right away, not to mention some distribution problems. So most people discovered Exciter the following year, after which Metallica and Slayer had already gained a foothold in the genre. If circumstances panned out differently, Exciter would have no doubt gotten a lot more recognition than they did. The most recent vinyl reissue of Heavy Metal Maniac is the 2008 edition from Megaforce on either red black splatter or red black and white splatter, each variant at 500 copies released. As for more recent news, the band stated in a March 2020 interview that they were shopping a new demo, looking to secure a deal, and hope to record an album soon. And the new album will include John Ricci's replacement, Daniel Decay, who's been in the band since late 2018. It's probably pretty weird to say that I'm excited about Exciter, but they really do earn their place amongst the big four of Canadian thrash metal, occasionally even nudging out Sacrifice, Anvil, and Razor. If you're wanting to listen to some metal history, this album is an important chapter in that story. And also, check out their following album, Violence and Force, a worthy album in its own right. It's easy to say that things went rather well for Ozzy Osbourne, but back in 1980 when he released his debut solo album, things weren't that simple. Having burned his bridges with Black Sabbath, Ozzy would have to prove himself all over again, but not without some help from his choice in guitar player. And let's be honest here, that guitar player was definitely key to his initial success as a solo artist. Randy Rhoads was already having troubles with his then current band Quiet Riot and decided to leave and try out for Ozzy's band, then known as Blizzard of Oz. At the coaxing of friend and future bassist for Slaughter, Dana Strum, Rhoads tried out and immediately got the gig. Rounding out the lineup was ex-Rainbow bassist Bob Daisley, ex-Uriah Heep drummer Lee Kirkslake, and keyboardist Don Airey, also ex-Rainbow. Ozzy's debut album would be released through Jet Records, the label of then Black Sabbath manager Don Arden. In fact, it was the label that made Blizzard of Oz the album title and instead crediting it specifically to Ozzy. Meanwhile, Arden was hoping Ozzy would return to Sabbath, and so he put his daughter Sharon in charge of the band, particularly to keep an eye on Ozzy. But then she took over Ozzy's management entirely, resulting in a split between her and the elder Arden. Ozzy and Sharon would be married 2 years later. But that wasn't exactly the only conflict during the making of this record. Plenty of arguments ensued over who wrote what, with virtually every member of the band fighting for his songwriting credits. Though many agree that Rhoads and Daisley wrote the lion's share of Blizzard of Oz. Of course, Sharon wasn't happy with this. She was upset over the level of creative input given by anyone not named Ozzy in the band. But there's no denying that much of this album's brilliance wasn't really coming from its singer. Favorites include I Don't Know, Mr. Crowley, and Suicide Solution. Back when I covered Ozzy's second record, I discussed the controversy of re-recorded tracks for a reissue that effectively screwed ex-members out of their royalties. Well, that happens here too. In 2002, Blizzard of Oz was reissued, but with bass and drum tracks replaced with those from Robert Trujillo and Mike Borden, respectively. However, the original parts were returned in 2011 after public outcry over the change. And if that's not controversy enough for you, there was also the loss of life associated with the track Suicide Solution. In October of 1984, a depressed teenager shot himself in the head after listening to the song, and the parents reacted with a lawsuit against Ozzy in 1986. But the case was ultimately dismissed on First Amendment grounds. Despite the legal issues and the other drama attached to this album, Blizzard of Oz did insanely well, having peaked at number 21 on the Billboard 200 and stayed on the chart for a whopping 107 weeks. Plenty of vinyl reissues of Blizzard of Oz are out there, but the most recent standalone version is the 2011 edition from Epic, mentioned earlier. The record is a 180-gram remastered version, put out as part of a Record Store Day promotion. Incidentally, the remastering was done from the original tapes. Blizzard of Oz is what it took to help Ozzy gain some former glory, but he also had a long and successful career spanning decades, and this is the album that really started that. In stark contrast, 1980 was also the year drummer Peter Criss left Kiss in search of his own fruitful solo career. His was a disastrous commercial flop, regardless of his tenure in the hottest band in the world. But Ozzy also had the aid of an amazing guitarist who unfortunately left us far too soon. If just discovering Ozzy, I recommend both this album and its follow-up release, Diary of a Madman. It was the album that unexpectedly named an entire subgenre of metal. But not only that, the sophomore release for the Unholy Three, known as Venom, was the record that would not only put them on the map, but also gain them some desired controversy. The album was recorded in 6 days at Impulse Studios in Newcastle, England, twice as long as it took to record their first record. Impulse was also the place a lot of Nawabum-era bands had their albums recorded and or mixed. Bands such as Raven, Jaguar, Blitzkrieg, Cloven Hoof, and many others. Before the album was even made, its name came from an interview Venom did, in which they were asked what type of music they played, since the band often shunned a lot of the labels the press were trying to put on them. One member said black metal, a combination of black magic and heavy metal. In guitarist Mantis's words, little did we know. Venom's first shows in America were in support of this album, having played 2 nights in New York in April 1983 with opening act Metallica. The members of Venom actually stayed at the house of Megaforce Records owner John Zazula for those nights, which is how Venom and Metallica connected. Venom would ultimately take the Bay Area Thrashers along on Metallica's very first tour of Europe. As for Venom's own record label, it was no secret that the band was Neat's bestseller and kept the label going throughout the 1980s. Best cuts on this one are Countess Bathory, Raise the Dead, and of course the title track to Black Metal.
Time to battle, chaos in hell, metal for me, pure. Fast mountain steel, fortune on wheels, brain hemorrhages the cure. Black metal, black metal, black metal, black metal, black metal.
Also released was a single, Bloodlust, along with the music video for the song. The video, as well as the one for Witching Hour, a track found on their previous album Welcome to Hell, were both released in September of 1982. And the sheer number of bands who've covered songs from this album are probably a testament to its perhaps unexpected significance. Bands such as Acheron, Cradle of Filth, Dimmu Borgir, Hypocrisy, Mayhem, Obituary, Macabre, Unleashed, Vader, Massacre, and the list goes on. Excluding picture discs, the most recent vinyl reissue of black metal was a 2016 2-LP set from Back on Black in red translucent vinyl. The second LP is comprised mostly of Radio 1 recording sessions and 12-inch single tracks. By all accounts, Venom never really expected the attention they got, whether it was from black metal's initial reception by fans and critics, or the inspiration from other bands to create some of the metal subgenres we still have to this very day. And although its namesake genre sounds very little like this record, the adoption of lyrical content, imagery, and overall delivery cannot be denied. If you're unfamiliar with these black metal gods, this is where you should begin. If you're a fan of the Vinyl Reacquisition Project, you'll definitely want to pick up an official VRP t-shirt. Log on to the website listed below for ordering details and get yours today. So what did you think of these albums, either back when they came out or even now? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, as always, like, subscribe, and share. And if you are subscribing for the first time, definitely hit that notification bell so you can get notified on each and every video I produce. And if you've been watching for a while and you want to contribute a little bit more, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/theaccusationnetwork. Check out the tiers, see how you can contribute. I put videos there up to 7 days early, as well as some other exclusive content. You should definitely check it out. Also, like or follow us on social media. The Accusation Network has accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify. Definitely follow us on those services. And as always, see you next month.